on his bed. Desiree. He had to meet her, and soon. Chapter 1. The plane banked over the Lincoln Memorial. Grace had her briefcase open on her lap. There were a dozen things to be packed away, but she stared out the window, pleased to see the ground rushing up toward her. There was nothing, as far as she was concerned, that was quite the same as flying. The plane was late. She knew that because the man across from her in seat 3B kept complaining about it. Grace was tempted to reach across the aisle and pat his hand, to assure him that 10 minutes in the scheme of things really didn't matter so much. But he didn't look as though he would appreciate the sentiment. Kathleen would be complaining too, she thought. Not out loud or anything, Grace mused as she smiled and settled back for the landing. Kathleen might have been just as irritated as 3B, but she would never have been rude enough to mumble and moan. If Grace knew her sister, and she did, Kathleen would have left home over an hour before, making certain to take into consideration the unpredictability of Washington traffic. Grace had heard the note in Kathleen's voice, betraying her annoyance with Grace that she'd chosen a flight that would arrive at 6:15, the height of rush hour. With 20 minutes to spare, Kathleen would have parked her car in the short-term lot, rolled up the windows, locked the doors, and made her way, without being tempted by the shops, to the gate. She would never have gotten lost or mixed the numbers up in her mind. Kathleen was always early. Grace was always late. That was nothing new. Still, she hoped, really hoped, there could be some common ground between them now. Sisters they were, but they had rarely understood each other. The plane bumped to earth, and Grace began tossing whatever came to hand into her briefcase. Lipstick tumbled in with matchbooks, pens with tweezers. That was something else a woman as organized as Kathleen would never understand. A place for everything. Grace agreed in principle, but her place never seemed to be the same from one time to the next. More than once, Grace had wondered how they could be sisters. She was careless, scatterbrained, and successful. Kathleen was organized, practical, and struggling. Yet they had come from the same parents, had been raised in the same small brick house in the suburbs of D.C., and had gone to the same schools. The nuns had never been able to teach Grace anything about organizing a notebook, but even as far back as 6th grade at St. Michael's, they had been fascinated by her skill at spinning a tale. When the plane was at the gate, Grace waited while the passengers, who were in a hurry to deplane, clogged the aisle. She knew Kathleen would probably be pacing, certain that her absent-minded sister had missed a flight again, but she needed a minute. She wanted to remember the love, not the arguments. As Grace had predicted, Kathleen was waiting at the gate. She watched the passengers file off and felt another flash of impatience. Grace always traveled first class, but she wasn't among the first people off the plane. She wasn't among the first 50. Probably chatting with the flight crew, Kathleen thought, and tried to ignore a quick stab of envy. Grace had never had to try to make friends. People were simply drawn to her. 2 years after graduation, and Grace, who had skimmed through school on charm, had been rising in her career. A lifetime later, and Kathleen, the honors student, was spinning her wheels in the same high school they had graduated from. She sat on the other side of the desk now, but little else had changed. Announcements for incoming and outgoing planes droned on. There were gate changes and delays, but still no Grace. Just as Kathleen had decided to check at the desk, she saw her sister walk through the gate. Envy faded. Irritation vanished. It was next to impossible to be annoyed with Grace when faced with her. Why was it she always looked as though she'd just stepped off a merry-go-round? Her hair, the same dark sable as Kathleen's, was cut to the chin and looked forever windswept around her face. Her body was long and lean, again like Kathleen's, but where Kathleen always felt sturdy, Grace looked like a willow, ready to bend whichever way the breeze beckoned. Now she looked rumpled, a hip-length sweater riding.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.